Hi everyone and welcome. What you see out here is a couple of my worm bins. They're the two oldest of my red wiggler bins. And they're not only red wiggler bins. The older of the two systems actually has other worms in it besides red wigglers. Some euros, some blue worms. And I was trying to get the worms to move out of the material in these bins. I've been suspicious of the material in both of these bins. So I've already set up the migration zones. Basically fresh bedding, fresh food, right here under the plastic to try to give the worms a place to go just in case the material in these bins is in fact somehow causing them some distress. And one of the potential reasons why the worms might be in distress is maybe because the pH levels within one or both of the systems are off. And I've always been unable to answer that question when people ask it. So I've created a little bit of a test using household items here. And I've laid out the stuff that's needed to perform the test. So let me really quickly show you what's going on here. So that's the first thing here on my checklist of things to do, which is to run a pH test on both bins. It's using vinegar and baking soda. Vinegar, as you may know, is acidic, and baking soda is the opposite. It's basic or alkaline. And basically, if you take some acidic material and you put it into material that's maybe too alkaline, it'll create a reaction, and vice versa. The whole idea here was to take sample material out of each of the bins, which I've done here already, and then add acid and alkaline to each to see if any of them react. So I've already got the vinegar, which is the acidic material, in this little glass cup. I've got some of the baking soda here, which I'm going to mix up with some water, and then we could perform this pH test, and maybe that'll help answer some of the questions that keep coming up. And the other thing that I've been doing on these two bins to try to give the worms a little bit of relief, which is to try to agitate the material and try to stir it up because it just seems too damp and clumpy. So the whole stirring up of the material that I've been doing only for the past day or two was to really try to promote the drying of the material and the aeration of the material. So I will be doing that again today, like I did yesterday, which is aerating the material in both of the bins. But in the younger bin over here, this is the one that I'm concerned about. So in that system, I was going to go to the extra measure of also stirring in some bedding. I've brought in some really fine leafy material from outside that I'm going to stir into the material. And I'm also going to apply some grit. And the other thing that I'm going to do in that bin after I've done that is I'm going to rearrange the material so that the feeding area that I'm trying to lure the worms into is going to get relocated, and I'm going to reset it so that it's right in the middle, so that worms from any direction, all angles, can just retreat into that area if in fact they're under distress and need somewhere better to go to. So that's kind of what I'm after today. So I'm going to rearrange things here a little bit, and we're going to begin with the pH test. So now I've mixed the baking soda with the water. So a lot of the powder stuff that just sank to the bottom, I left that behind, and I think I've got a pretty good solution of this stuff here. This is just the vinegar. So why don't we do a quick test here on the system that I'm more concerned about, the younger system. So we're going to dump in some alkaline, dump in some acid, and we're going to watch the reaction. So let's check out what happens over here first. Here again, I hope I'm doing this right because this is not my forte, that's for sure. Okay. So I'm just watching to see if maybe some bubbles form. I mean, I'll accept the fact that there might be some bubbles kind of getting released just by the fact that we've filled each container with fluid. So if any trapped bubbles of air come up, then that's understandable. Just wondering if it might help if we did a little bit of a stir here. I guess I wouldn't want to use the same stick, right, to stir with, because that could disturb things here and cross-contaminate the materials. Maybe I can just do a little agitation here like so. I actually do have a clean little piece of stick that I can use over here. And I don't even know if this is a reaction that we should expect to see happening immediately or if it's going to take time. But I guess just in case it is something that might take time, why don't we just go ahead and proceed with doing the same treatment of the materials over here. Once again, pouring in the baking soda solution on this side, pouring in the vinegar on this side, and then here too I'll give it the same treatment of just stirring the stuff around a little bit. Again, I've got another little piece of clean stick that we can do the same with here. And if anyone out there knows this subject matter, then I would certainly be willing to take some advice for sure. So I'd love to hear anyone's thoughts on how I'm conducting this experiment and just any sort of feedback on observations. Obviously, if I'm doing the experiment wrong, then the whole test is garbage. But I'd be curious to hear what people think about what they see here. So far, since I'm seeing no reaction, my gut instinct says pH imbalance is not really the issue here. Again, I could be completely off and the test could be completely invalid because I did it way off or way wrong. Here and there I'm seeing a little bit of movement, but it's only potworms basically coming out of the material and surfacing and moving around. I'm sure they're probably not happy about what's going on. You know, just out of curiosity, I did take what remained of the vinegar and what remained of the solution of baking soda, and I combined them. And the one thing I did notice as soon as I did was sort of an effervescent bubbling of the material, meaning that you know, that probably is the sort of reaction we probably would have wanted to expect from here. So I just thought I'd include that really quick here too, but so far I'm seeing no change. Alright, well, I've taken a few minutes to go upstairs and rinse off all those little glass jars and put everything away and whatnot. So I'm treating this as a completed test. Assuming it was done correctly, I'm going to also assume that the results of the test tell us that pH is not an issue here. Hopefully I've done the test right, and hopefully my assumptions are correct that the outcome of the test tells us that pH imbalance is not what's affecting these bins. So on to dealing with the rest of my checklist. I'm going to just go ahead and take care of the quick, easy one first. I'm just going to stir things up there, try to help promote aeration and drying. Then we'll work our way over to the bin that I really think needs a little bit more attention. Let's get things reorganized here and get to work on that. So now here in the older bin, the bin that's got the mix of the different types of worms, I'm feeling more and more that it might just be a matter of helping with the aeration of the material to help things get back on track here. The worms always seem pretty comfortable when I check the material and I stir things up. So even yesterday when I was in here to try to aerate things, it did seem to me like maybe the worm population is in pretty good shape. It might just be that there's a little bit of excess moisture here in this material. So my idea here was to sort of let the two bins diverge a little bit and apply sort of a minimum approach to dealing with each one based on what I think is the most dire need. So here my only objective was to aerate the material, give it a little bit of a stir, at the same time trying to verify that the worm population does in fact still seem pretty lively and active and healthy. And that does seem to be my impression every time I go, looking through here. It's the other bin where the poor worms just seem really sluggish and lethargic and just generally not doing well. So here I'm just going to assume that the only thing that needs remedying is the excess moisture within the system. And it kind of makes me wonder if I might have overreacted in the case of this container. I may have, and if I did, that's fine. The only thing that was lost was the opportunity to let the worms forage and pick out all the remaining scraps of larger bits of bedding and food. The other thing that was kind of missed is the opportunity to let the material dry out to make it a little bit less cozy and comfortable for the worms. further inspiring them to move out and seek a more comfortable place, which here would be ideally the feeding area that I'm trying to lure them into. So even down low, the material just doesn't seem that bad. Otherwise, it's still damp, you know. Not that bad, but still damp enough that I think it could use a kind of a daily stirring every day for a while just to help it along. Continuing with the coverings that are consisting of only paper out here to allow for ongoing evaporation of the moisture in here. And really nothing more. So I'm going to just go with that light touch and try to apply only what appears to be needed and not try to apply some sort of a blanket to the bin. So I mean, we've stirred everything up on this far side. As we start getting closer to the feeding zone, this might be a pretty good sign that maybe the worms are realizing that the place to be is over in the feeding area, and maybe they are gravitating towards it. So here I am, just trying to be optimistic. If I need a reality check, then by all means, please set me straight. Yesterday I did attempt to add more moisture to the feeding area because it did seem a little bit drier than it could be or should be. So I sprayed it down pretty thoroughly in an attempt to try to address that. Some of the leaves I'm seeing in here do seem like they might still be a bit dry, but perhaps not nearly as bad as it was yesterday. I don't know if bad is the right word. Definitely could have used a little bit of improvement. So here too, definitely dry. So I've got my squirt bottle. I want to address this while I'm in here, you know. Give the material a little spray down. This should work. If I'm just careful to make sure that every handful that appears to have dry material in it gets a little squirt, we'll gradually get to the point where we hydrate most of the material. Down here I'm seeing some of the food items that were laid in here to try to lure the worms over. Some banana peel, some grit to go along with that as well. So you can probably hear me, I'm squirting a little bit more quickly at this point, trying to apply a lot more moisture to this stuff because it could certainly use it. There's also the matter of this material being pretty much sterile, meaning it doesn't have all those beneficial bacteria and microbes and fungi and all those things that worms generally need in order to consume foods. Without all those things being active within this feeding area, it's understandable that the worms aren't quite that interested in this yet as they could be or should be. It's a little bit of a bummer because that tells me that, you know, I could probably expect a similar turnout in the feeding area of the other bin where I'm trying so hard to get the worms to exit the material as quickly as possible. I'm starting to just get concerned about that other bin. Okay. You might have seen there was like the butt end of a head of lettuce over here, or maybe it's the butt end of a head of cabbage or something. There was the banana peel. There's a couple other food scraps in here. I would imagine that the leaves themselves would be seen by the worms as a tempting piece of food as well, not just bedding. So my hope is that the worms begin taking a shine to this area and start moving over into it, but so far I'm seeing very little such action. But we'll continue to check in on these worms just to see how their progress is coming along. I believe I've agitated the material adequately at this point to help it aerate. So I think we could probably put it away now. And hopefully this is enough to help spur on the type of action that we're hoping for in here. I just want to make sure it's all kind of tilled up and loosened up. to help the stuff aerate as quickly as possible. Yeah, you know, I mean, every time I see the worms, no matter where I stir in here, it just doesn't seem like there's a lot of reason for concern. It's the other bin where I'm really getting a little bit worried about the inhabitants of the container. So here we're going to cover up and let this continue as is. I'm almost wondering if checking in on a daily basis in this system at least is perhaps unnecessary. It's really the other system that seems like it could use the active troubleshooting and intervention. So let's go ahead and get that other one over here and see how things look over there. You wouldn't be able to tell, right? It's almost like a an identical setup. So I did do that on purpose. I was trying to go like for like so that I can use that as a mode of comparing one system to the other to see if they're getting similar results to one another. But you know, another thing I could probably do, which is not a bad idea, which is to rinse off my glove and not allow any sort of cross-contamination to come into play here either. Not that it should matter, because I think there's really nothing wrong in the other bin to worry about, but let's play it safe. I'm going to be right back. Okay, so now that we've got a nice clean glove, we can proceed. Let me just reiterate what the game plan here was. Number one was to relocate the feeding area and centralize it so that worms can get to it a little bit more easily. I think that's going to go hand in hand with leaving out this barrier partition to prevent anything from coming in their way. So I'm going to go ahead and do a full extraction of what's been put in here as far as the feeding area and place it temporarily into this container here. So I'm going to go ahead and proceed with that right away. Here too, the material seems to be a little bit drier than it needs to be. I wouldn't want that to contribute to the worms not coming over to it. As soon as they sense there's food over here and everything else, I would want them to feel pretty comfortable coming over here. I wouldn't want dryness to be the one thing that prevents them from doing so. So I think we'll go ahead and we'll make sure we dampen this stuff along the way as we access it, because it does seem a little bit drier than it needs to be. Yeah, definitely drier than it needs to be. So far I've not observed any worms in here, which kind of makes sense. We didn't see any in the other one either. Very dry material. So here and there we're going to find similar materials. There's the part of a banana peel, there's chunks of other kitchen scraps in here, different types of fruits and veggies, various food items intended to try to lure the worms over. I think in the case of the other system, where I'm perhaps not feeling that the matter is quite as urgent as it is in this one, I could probably just let it ride the way it is, even if the food that we're using to lure them with is maybe not quite so tempting. And here I'm wondering if I might benefit from tossing in an additional delicious morsel of food, maybe a chunk of, I don't know, cantaloupe or something like that, just to really up the ante. And if they're not coming over for what's in here already, maybe they'll come over for that. Kind of feeling like I've got to do everything in my power to try to get the worms out of this material. They just don't look happy or healthy in here at all, that's for sure. Way too dry, that's for sure. So I think we've got pretty much the entire contents of the feeding area. And if you try to imagine it being right here in the middle of the bin, I guess it's going to take up a circle that's about the same diameter as this container here, even though this is not a circular container. So we'll get back to replacing the feeding area once we're done with the agitation of the stuff in here. And you know, once we move the feeding area to the center, that piece of paper we had covering up will only cover up part of the container. So maybe we'll use this piece to try to cover up the other side. And then the plastic can just be left in the middle to try to force recirculation of the moisture only over the feeding area, allowing the rest of the material in the bin to continue drying. So now this little bit of remaining leafy matter that's still in here kind of goes hand in hand with what a lot of people have been suggesting, which is, you know, trying to help this material dry off a little bit more quickly than just allowing air to do the job for us. So to try to make that happen a little bit more rapidly, I went ahead and I went outside to my leaf bags that are out in the yard, and I used my screen to try to collect a whole bunch of really fine particle matter. So you can see how fine this stuff is. It's the stuff that went through a 1/4 inch screen, and I know a lot of this kind of snuck through too, a lot of the sticks and stuff. So we're gonna see what we could do about incorporating some of this leafy material into this overly damp castings. And this at the same time should give us a little bit of a view into how the worms in here are doing. It's kind of becoming hard to see the worms as they mix in with the leafy material. I guess I'm also kind of using my sense of smell to see if I can smell any more of that that odor that would tell me that there's more worms dying in here. So now I think this worm might be an example of another thing that is going on here. Look at this guy, he looks terrible. There's this symptom called string of pearls, where you look at a worm, and I'm not sure if it's possible to see here, but it's the worm's body is little bulbs, you know. It's not just a smooth tubular shape, but it's got these little sections where it seems like it's just withered away to nothing in between each of those sections. And I think that's the reason it's referred to by some as a string of pearls kind of a condition. So in addition to adding leaves to address the moisture, it's my understanding, based on one of the viewers' comments and feedback, that the absence of grit is what's causing that. So like the gases collect within their body because there's no grit or insufficient grit, and that ultimately causes that deterioration of their body. So I've got my supply of grit here. Besides adding leaves, it was my plan to also stir in some grit while I'm at it here. So let's make sure we do that too as we go. Trying to create a fairly consistent type of combination of overly damp castings combined with dry leafy carbon-based materials to help soak up some of the excess moisture, and at the same time trying to supplement the shortage of grit, which might be the explanation for the string of pearls condition that I'm seeing in a lot of these worms, ultimately leading to that worm succumbing to that condition because their body just breaks apart and then they die. And then at some point when we're kind of satisfied with the consistency of this material in terms of having all the stuff blended in, we'll gradually start creating an opening down the middle that we can replace the feeding zone into. And hopefully it'll be easier for the worms to pass through this material now. And hopefully the material will also start to dry as the dry leaves soak in some of the moisture from the surrounding material. And then hopefully we can just get the worms out of here, you know. I'm not sure what it is exactly that's causing all this trouble, but my main concern at this point is just the well-being of the worms, and I just want them out of this material. I'm not too concerned with the castings. A lot of people would know just from watching my videos that I usually strive to get really clean castings that don't have all kinds of bedding bits and food bits stuck in it. But obviously that's not the priority here. The priority is to get the worms out and, you know, save them from ongoing distress, or what appears to be distress. So this this material here, still wondering if it's possibly still a little bit too dry. I mean, we've certainly added a fair bit of moisture to it. And I'm also wondering if it might be beneficial to run upstairs and grab maybe a chunk of cantaloupe or something to add to this feeding area to help increase its appeal. So I think I'm going to do just that. I'm going to run upstairs, go tap into my supply of kitchen scraps and worm food to try to include one other object in here that hopefully helps drive their migration into the feeding area. So I'll be right back. So now, besides the cantaloupe, I got a cucumber, another banana peel. I'm even going to throw a couple ice cubes on top just to try to add a little bit of slow time release moisture to the feeding area, in the hopes that it all helps, you know, dampen up the area and make it a little bit more appealing for the worms so that they end up being gravitated over into there. So I thought I would scoop out about half of what's been collected here and drop that down into the bottom. And then we could load in some of these additional food items. I'll place these ice cubes on the top so they can just soak in from the top and hydrate everything. I guess we can maybe try to chip this cucumber into little pieces too. Try to spread this stuff around so that the scent of yummy fresh fruit can be sensed from all directions. Can you tell I'm doing everything I can think of to try to make this effective? And then we'll just go ahead and drop in what remains of this material that had made up the horizontal migration feeding zone. And I guess technically it's still horizontal because it's certainly not vertical. I guess it's just differentiating the whole idea of migrating the worms out of one container into another by having one container resting on top of the other. Here you're just migrating the worms in place within the same container from the material that they inhabit into the space where you want them to be. And I guess we can just sort of attempt to level things off here a little bit, possibly collapsing the size of the feeding area a little bit by bringing things inboard a bit. So I don't know what to expect. But I certainly hope we start seeing some turnaround on this environment, or at least in the behavior and you know, just general well-being of the worms, because they just don't look well, and I feel so bad for them. I just don't want them to be suffering. I'd rather have them all in a spot where I can pull them all out and move them over into a nice fresh new environment where they can continue to do the important work that they do for us, and do so without being in a state of discomfort, which to me it just seems like it's pretty clear that that's exactly what's happening here, and it just doesn't seem right to subject them to that. So, you know, I don't want to go overboard covering this material. I think by leaving it uncovered, the ongoing drying of the material through evaporation is something I want to continue to see happening here. But down here in the middle area, we're going to promote the recirculation of whatever moisture is in the bin so that it stays in the center, hopefully also drawing worms to that area because of that. So, all right, everyone, that's it for today's video. Hopefully this helped. I don't know, we'll see. Only time will tell, I believe. So I've got a couple things I've got to put away here and get things cleaned up, but I'm not going to take up any more of your time with that because that stuff's boring. Before I go there really quick, let me just say thank you. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. Also, if you haven't done so, please consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Take care.